Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The Grand Army of the Republic was beloved by citizens of the Republic and remembered fondly by the Empire as well. It was seen as one of the most well-trained and efficient military forces ever created in the galaxy. Led by their brave Jedi commanders, fans of Star Wars viewed the clone army as a force of good. But the actual circumstances that the average clone trooper encountered while serving the Republic was oftentimes quite brutal and unfair, even compared with the later Imperial military. Today I kind of want to talk about how the Galactic Empire's military force was actually a much more ethical organization when compared to the Grand Army of the Republic. Were it not for the shocking appearance of the Separatist droid army, it's very possible that Palpatine would have never been able to win enough votes in the Senate to pass the Military Creation Act. The appearance of a random clone army that was apparently paid for by a dead Jedi should have warranted a lot of questions, suspicion, and probably investigations as well. Follow the money trail and things will eventually lead to a powerful lobby group that basically runs the galaxy. Also, from a legal standpoint, the individuals who created the clone army didn't really go through legal means to get this government contract, which usually involves many rounds of background checks to see if that contractor is actually legitimate. Dig a little deeper and follow the monetary breadcrumbs, and investigators will probably have to implicate some people that were very close to Sheev Palpatine. So, from its inception, the Grand Army of the Republic was already tied to scandal and corruption. Aside from the clone troopers that transitioned from the GAR to the Imperial military, the Galactic Empire's military force was mostly a volunteer fighting force. It provided great careers and economic opportunities for people who joined up. In the Outer Rim, which historically has been neglected by the core worlds and the Republic government, suddenly people from backwater worlds now had an option to join an Imperial academy, get an education, and improve their own lives and their families by serving the Empire. In many ways, the Imperial military force was an equalizer between the haves and have-nots of the galaxy and created long-term meaningful changes that lifted entire groups of people from poverty. The clones, on the other hand, were created at a Kaminoan cloning facility for a very specific purpose. And so the clones weren't just conscripted into fighting for the Republic, they were essentially slaves with no choice in the matter. A clone trooper couldn't just choose to leave his posting. Not only would his fellow brothers feel betrayed, he would also risk getting court-martialed and even executed for desertion. It should be noted that the Imperial military did occasionally use conscripts. Generally, these guys would fight in the Imperial Army and not the Stormtrooper Corps. The Imperial Bureau of Security would routinely conduct interviews and monitor the soldiers of the Empire for morale and loyalty reasons. As the War of the Rebel Alliance escalated, the ISB became more intrusive and started monitoring the audio and video feeds of Stormtrooper helmets when they were on patrol. But this was nowhere near as intrusive as what the Kaminoans did to the clone troopers. Not only were the clones' personalities altered at a genetic level so that they would be more loyal and obedient soldiers, they also aged twice as fast as the average human being so that time could be saved during the training process. This kind of created a weird moral issue where you basically had clones who looked like adults and physically were adults, but at the same time had the mental and emotion capacity of like a 9 or 10-year-old. To cap things off, Kaminoans also installed control chips in the clones' brains which were able to override their willpower and force them to do crazy things like murder their Jedi commanders. The clones that eventually found out about these little ticking time bombs in their head felt betrayed, and many would leave the Republic/Empire as a result. And then there were those who survived Order 66 and successfully carried out their assassination of their Jedi commander. A lot of these individuals would actually live on with a tremendous amount of guilt over their actions. The Galactic Empire, for most of its existence, ruled over a relatively peaceful and stable galaxy. Sure, you had systems that were in conflict with the Empire or with each other, but these battles were generally isolated incidents. There really wasn't much of a galactic-wide conflict until after the Battle of Yavin 4. And so life for the average Imperial soldier was relatively safe, and casualties were generally low amongst the entire military force. For the most part, stormtroopers and army troopers were used for peacekeeping missions. The clone army, on the other hand, was thrown directly into a massive galaxy-wide civil war. The Battle of Geonosis saw the deployment of the entire clone army, and the casualties suffered during this first battle were horrendous. The clone army fought against the massive separate destroyed army for 4 straight years on multiple fronts all across the galaxy. Most clone units would actually suffer close to or even over 100% casualties throughout the war. It was unfortunately quite a common occurrence for entire legions to get wiped out and destroyed. That's what happened to the 182nd Legion on Felucia. While the average clone trooper was very capable and good at their job, the higher level commanding officers in the Grand Army of the Republic were mostly made up of either former Judicial Force officers or members of the Jedi Order. The Jedi Order were given the task of leading the Grand Army of the Republic by Chancellor Palpatine, but were completely unprepared for the task at hand. Very few of the Jedi Knights and Masters had military experience or an understanding of battlefield tactics, and it would show in the first year of the war. During the Battle of Geonosis, the highly trained clone commandos were actually deployed in regular infantry formations and completely wasted. Out of the 10,000 commandos that had been deployed on Geonosis, only 5,000 were still able to operate after the battle. It was really a disaster of epic proportions for the clones, and it really did sour the relationship between the Jedi and the men they were leading into battle. Because there just weren't enough Jedi to go around, some clone units were even being led by Padawans who were still teens or even preteens. The Imperial Academy system was probably one of Emperor Palpatine's biggest accomplishments. This training pipeline tapped into local and regional schools, found the best and brightest on each planet, and gave them an opportunity to join the Imperial military service. The competition at these Imperial academies was cutthroat, but ensured that every branch's officer corps was well trained and motivated to accomplish whatever mission was given to them. Again, we see a merit-based system dictate who was in charge of the Imperial military. This was a much more fair and competent system than compared to the Jedi commissioned officers the Republic used. During the first year of the Clone Wars, clone troopers were ferried from planet to planet, from battlefield to battlefield. There was very little respite for the clones and very little reason for the Republic to give them any R&R. After all, clones didn't really have much of a voice. They didn't have family members who were citizens of the Republic, and they themselves weren't technically citizens of the Republic either, so there was no reason to treat them like human beings. Shortages in manpower would plague the Galactic Republic for the entirety of the war. Finally, towards the end of the war, during the Outer Rim sieges, it became more and more common to see clone troopers rotate off the front line to worlds like Coruscant and Kamino for some well-deserved relaxation. The Empire would oftentimes draw soldiers from garrisons from the local population, so at the end of the day, a stormtrooper or army trooper could retire to their own domiciles and return to a normal life after patrolling all day. This obviously would become a problem when that world would openly rebel against the Empire, but for the most part, the average Imperial army trooper or stormtrooper had a very separate personal life that they could still enjoy after their day of working in the military. When you have a heavily militarized society, it is in the government's interest to treat all of your soldiers and veterans in the best way possible. A failure to do so could potentially lead to some major political unrest and even an armed coup. And so the Empire would actually set up retirement buildings in villages for veterans of past wars. Although it should be mentioned that the Empire only ruled for less than 2 decades, so the amount of veterans they had to accommodate was probably pretty limited. The clone troopers, unlike their Imperial counterparts, didn't really have any set contracts for how long they would serve. And so they would generally just keep on fighting until they were deemed too old, and basically they would get phased out for some non-clone stormtrooper. There are actually even these very dark rumors that clones who were far too injured to continue fighting because of a loss of limb or some other bodily function would just end up being kind of discarded and turned into nutrient paste. But that's an urban legend. There was talk in the Republic Senate of retirement as a reward for the clone services, but it never really manifested in a meaningful way. Some of the more ambitious clones did eventually find work in the private security sector as operators, mercenaries, and consultants, but for the most part they lacked the job skills to do much else besides fight. There were also some very exceptional clones that had performed very well in battle that were being considered for political office and political grooming. But for the most part, the Republic didn't create any concrete plans and left the clones on their own. The prequel trilogy kind of glosses over just how messed up the Grand Army of the Republic really is, and when you compare it to an equally messed up system like the Galactic Empire military, you'll find that the clone army is actually lacking in the morality and ethics category, which should be really surprising because the Republic is supposed to be, the so-called good guys. But Anyway, let me know in the comments section below if I've missed anything about just how terrible it was to be a clone trooper when compared to being a stormtrooper. I look forward to seeing your comments. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.